We've had a chance to find 1 Peter chapter 4. We are going to read verses 12 through 29. So if you would join with me, 1 Peter chapter 4, beginning at verse 12. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that is taking place among you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you are sharing Christ's sufferings, so that you may also be glad and shout for joy when His glory is revealed. If you are reviled for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory, which is the Spirit of God, is resting on you. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, a thief, a criminal, or even as a mischief maker. Yet if any of you suffers as a Christian, do not count it a disgrace, but glorify God because you bear His name. For the time has come for judgment to begin with the household of God. If it begins with us, what will be the end for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if it is hard for the righteous to be saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinners? Therefore, let those suffering in accordance with God's will entrust themselves to a faithful Creator while continuing to do good. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay. Look, I get it. I don't want to talk about suffering anymore either. I mean, just trying to prepare the sermon this week just was wearing me out, because after 2 plus months of social distancing and isolation, after the stress of figuring out how to navigate in quarantine and not being able to see the people I love, not being able to get together and trying not to think about how traumatic this all is, I don't want to be present to my suffering anymore. I don't want to hear about suffering anymore. I don't want to talk about suffering anymore. And for the record, this is why I don't like going through 1 Peter. Because it's 5 chapters of Peter talking about how to suffer. Yet here we are. This is kind of why pastors like to preach series, because then we get to choose the topics we talk about. When you do the lectionary, you're kind of at the mercy of the lectionary. Okay. All right. So let's try to come at this again, but let's try to do it from a different angle. So, because if you're like me, I want to hear some hope right now. I don't want to hear another, oh, you're going to suffer, just be present with it. I want some real hope. And I'm betting you do too. And Peter doesn't help, because right out of the gate, beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that is taking place among you, as though something strange were happening to you. That means, that's Peter saying, don't act surprised when you suffer, as though that were something strange to you. Like, that should be familiar. I know that's not exactly great news. That's not great news. There's a frustration at the idea that suffering should be normal, because no one wants suffering to be familiar. Is there anybody out there that really wants suffering to be familiar? Like, let me be intimate with suffering. No, nobody wants to suffer. Nobody wants suffering to be a regular occurrence. We avoid suffering like the plague because we don't want to experience it at all, let alone experience it so much that it's cozy for us. And that feels like bad news, but is there a way that this isn't bad news? That this reminder that we should be familiar with suffering could be good news, could be encouraging. Well, let's set some ground rules first. Not all suffering is equal. And that's true. I mean, we already know that's true. That's why we have there's the phrase first world problems, because we recognize that in a first world country, there is suffering that we endure that we call suffering that would be laughed at in a third world country. So we already recognize that there's already like inequality among types of suffering. But there's also a different kind of inequality. So, and let me unpack that for a minute, because there are these different types of suffering. There is self-righteous suffering. And this is the kind of suffering that is perceived usually from a loss of privilege. So for example, I was with my family at Costco, and this was obviously before the pandemic hit. This was probably in early this year, maybe last year. And we had all the kids with us. We're at Costco, and Wesley needed his diaper changed, as a 2-year-old is wont to do. And so I took Wesley and I went to go change his diaper. And thankfully, Costco has those diaper changing stations in the men's room, because not every place does. Some still have them only in the women's restroom. And so it's a little frustrating if I've got the kids and I'm in a place that only has it in the women's restroom, because hey, I got to change my kid's diaper sometimes too. And so I go into the men's room, and they've got the diaper changing station there, and I get ready to start prepping Wesley to have his diaper changed. And this guy says to me, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he makes some quip about, yep, they've got those in there, they've got those in here now. Like lamenting that there are diaper changing stations in the men's room. And there was very palpably the unspoken lament that that's women's work, that's mom's work to change the diaper. And it was like, I was just like, whatever, dude. And I changed my kid's diaper because I didn't get to breastfeed them. And so this was my chance to provide for my 2-year-old. And I cherish those. And when I don't have to do them too often, and when they're not too smelly, and then I'm just as grumpy about it as everybody else. But there was that's that self-righteous suffering, that the loss of the privilege of being able to go into men's room and not see a diaper changing station, or not have the responsibility or have to think about the responsibility of possibly changing a diaper. So that's the self-righteous suffering. The second type is self-inflicted suffering. And we're familiar with that. That's the suffering from poor decisions. So consequences for bad actions. So when we do something stupid and we experience suffering from doing something stupid, that's self-inflicted. Then the last is cross-bearing suffering. And this is suffering for committing allegiance to Christ. So it's either suffering that comes from just the profession of faith itself, if you're in a family that has never really been religious or scorns religious people, or if you're in a country where Christianity is illegal or persecuted, then just that profession of faith in Jesus is going to bring suffering. Or it's because of the different life that Christianity calls you to, that Jesus calls you to, a different way of living that puts you at odds with the culture around you. And this last suffering is the one Peter is talking about. Now let me tell you a story. It's about Gary Player. I'm guessing I've got at least 2 people between Scott and Uncle Johnny that know who Gary Player is. Possibly more. So for those of you that don't, quick bio. Gary Player is a pro golfer born in South Africa. A South African pro golfer, and is considered one of the greatest ever. And he kind of gets drowned out with Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, and Tiger Woods. But Gary Player is legit one of the greatest golfers of all time. He won 163 tournaments, professional tournaments, on 6 different continents. And I'm guessing if they'd had one in Antarctica, he'd have won there too. He won, over his career, 18 majors, 9 on the PGA Tour, and 9 in the Champions League, which is like the seniors tour. He's the only non-American to achieve what they call the career Grand Slam. There are the four on the PGA Tour. There are the four big majors: the U.S. Open, the British Open, Masters, and like the PGA Open or something like that. Yeah, I think, anyway, four big majors, and if you win all four of those over the course of your career, they call that the career Grand Slam. The really prestigious is to win them all in the same year. And that one's, has that ever been? I don't think that's ever been done. Tiger's had it where he's done it where he's been the last one to win all four, but he didn't do it all in the same season. He covered a couple of seasons to do it. But Gary Player is the only non-American to have done it, and when he did it, he achieved it at the age of 29, which at the time was the youngest any player had ever achieved a career Grand Slam. Jack Nicklaus did it at 26, and then Tiger Woods has done it at 24, so he's now the third youngest to have ever done it. And because of his success, he is understandably in the World Golf Hall of Fame. So, back when Gary Player was still in his prime, still playing, there's a story about him being out on the driving range and he's practicing shots. And understandably, when somebody as good as Gary Player is out there practicing, it's going to draw a crowd. And so people have just gathered around him, just watching him practice shots, just taking a ball out and just hitting drivers, irons, wedges, hitting everything. And the crowd is just there in awe of his abilities, just watching him put the ball wherever, however he wanted. Draws, fades, putting backspin on it so it rolls back into the hole, rolling up to, just anything, drop shots, anything you wanted to do. He's just out there just putting the ball where he wanted it, how he wanted to put it there. And everybody's just amazed watching him hit these balls. And so there's this guy in the crowd who just kind of says out loud, he just says, "Man, I'd give anything to hit a ball like that." How many of us have thought the same thing? You've watched somebody doing something that's a high degree of difficulty and just thought, "Man, I'd give anything to do that." Maybe it's hit a ball, write a story, sing a song, watching the gymnastics, like watching the Olympics, just, man, I'd give anything to be able to perform at that level. We all think it. This guy just said it out loud. And then Gary Player stopped what he was doing and he turned around and looked the guy square in the eye and he said, "No, you wouldn't. You would want to hit a golf ball like that if it was easy. You know what it takes to hit a golf ball like me? It takes getting up at 5 a.m. every morning to hit 1,000 balls until my hand bleeds, and then go in the clubhouse and bandage it up so I can get back and hit another 1,000 balls." Now that doesn't sound like fun. But it takes a tremendous amount of pain to be transformed. And most aren't willing to suffer like that. See, here's the truth. The kind of pain we endure can change how we're formed. The kind of pain we endure changes how we're formed. So I got one more sports illustration. Sorry, this one's probably more for like Harvey, because I'm sure he's watched The Last Dance. So Michael Jordan, I don't think I need to give a bio on Michael Jordan. I'm pretty sure everybody will know who that is. And most of you know, but in case there's not, Michael Jordan, best basketball player in the world, but also stopped and played baseball for a bit. And it may seem like just an athlete changing from one sport to another and that his training and all his athleticism would carry over. But I want to read you something that was said in that Last Dance documentary, which was a documentary that was really about the life of Michael Jordan. And one of the episodes covers his journey into baseball. And this is what his personal trainer told him when he retired the first time from basketball to go play baseball. The trainer told him that the workouts are going to be totally different. 2 totally different methods of training your body and muscles. This is, make no mistake, this is going to be detrimental to your basketball career. So his trainer was saying directly to Michael Jordan, listen, if you do this, and you want to come back to basketball at some point, going to play baseball, you're not going to be in basketball shape when you get back. You're going to be doing different exercises, making training different body parts. You're going to fundamentally change the way your body shape is, because baseball and basketball are different sports that require different skills and different formations and different everything. And he said, this will be detrimental to your basketball career if you come back. And sure enough, after his return to basketball, the year after he came back, he averaged his lowest points per game per season. Or for the season, for his career. Lowest average points per game over the course of the season for his career. And it was the only early exit he ever suffered from the playoffs between 1991 and 1998. Going and playing baseball hurt his ability to play basketball at the professional level, at the level that Michael Jordan was used to playing. Now, obviously, he went back to training for basketball and got back to his level and won 3 more championships. But the thing is that the training is a form of suffering for athletes. And the type of suffering endured differs from sport to sport and produces different habits, effects, and results. So I played baseball all through college, and so the training I did was for that sport. I remember in high school having friends that I played with in high school that played basketball or wrestled during the off season. And when they came back to baseball, it took a while for them to get their feet back under them because they were they were in shape for basketball or for wrestling, but then when they came back for baseball, the shape that they were in did not translate. So how we endure suffering and the type of suffering we endure can shape us to different ends. So what does this have to do with 1 Peter or with us here today? Well, Peter differentiates between the different types of suffering. It's a given, like there's no question of if you suffer. It's a given that you will suffer. There will be suffering. We live in a world where suffering exists in excess. There's enough for everybody. It's about the only thing that we have in abundance sometimes, it feels like. It's the only thing everybody can agree that there is an abundance of is suffering. But the kind and way we endure that suffering matters. Peter's focus is on that cross-bearing suffering that I talked about earlier. It's the suffering for trying to live as Jesus lived. And then that suffering brings blessing. So when we experience the pain, the stress, the fatigue, the suffering for trying to live as Jesus lived, then that suffering brings blessing and also reveals the glory of God. That's what Peter says. If you are reviled for the name of Christ, you are blessed because the Spirit of glory, which is the Spirit of God, is resting on you. Now, don't look for those in self-righteous suffering or in the suffering that's self-inflicted. Like those type of sufferings aren't going to bring God's glory resting on you. So God's glory doesn't rest on you because you did something dumb that caused suffering. Like that's just not how this works. When we participate in the suffering of Christ, the suffering that comes with following a Christ who experienced suffering, we also experience communion with Jesus. So the suffering with Christ becomes this communal event that when we suffer, We experience what Jesus experienced, and that creates a relational connection between us and Jesus. So there's opportunity when suffering the way Jesus did, when suffering for the name of Christ, when suffering because we're living differently than the world thinks we should, when we encounter and endure and engage in that suffering, that brings us closer to Jesus, which is good news. See, that's the thing, that suffering brings us closer to where we want to go. Right? Isn't that relational closeness to our Creator, that relational closeness to our Savior, is the very goal and purpose of all of our discipleship? It's not, we don't do discipleship just so that we can recite Bible verses from memory. We don't do discipleship so that we can give long treatises on the theology of Christ's divinity or on the Holy Spirit or any number eschatology, any number of theological things. We do discipleship so that we can move closer to the one we worship. And so, like an athlete, suffering through training, suffering through the exercises, suffering through the weight training, which you know that when you lift weights, what you're doing is actually tearing the muscle. Like every time you lift weights, when you and work out, what you're actually doing is creating tiny tears in the muscle fiber that make the muscle bigger when it repairs itself. That to me sounds like torture. Like we're going to tear all their muscle fibers. Like that sounds awful, but that's what you're doing to yourself. That's why I feel like it's an appropriate analogy here to talk about that training, that is enduring suffering. Go watch a practice of basketball players or any athlete and watch what they put themselves through and tell me it's not suffering. But they're happy to do it. They rejoice in the suffering because they know it gets them closer to their goal. It gets them closer to what their pursuit is. And in the church, in the community of faith, our pursuit is Jesus. And the suffering we experience brings us closer to that goal. Suffering is the worst. Like, I'm not trying to pretend it's not. But our suffering for and with and from Christ is not void. It's not empty suffering. It becomes part of the process of our own transformation, changing us from people geared for the world into a people built for the kingdom. If we are suffering now because of our allegiance is to Christ, and that causes us to lose family or friends, keeps us in isolation to care for our neighbors, forces us to reckon with our darker impulses, then rejoice and be glad and shout for joy. For you are experiencing kingdom transformation. And so I encourage you, I want you to be encouraged to endure, because the reward and victory are yours. Because you are shaped into the likeness of the King. And when you are shaped into the likeness of the King, the world will be uncomfortable. Being in the world will feel more like suffering. But being in the kingdom will feel like comfort and relief. For those that aren't transformed into the likeness of the King, the world feels comfortable, but being in the kingdom will feel like suffering. But for those of us shaped like Jesus, being in the kingdom will bring comfort and relief. And that may be part of how we recognize where God is present and at work. Because we will feel uncomfortable in places where the world is ruling. But when we enter places where God is in control, where God is ruling, where Jesus reigns and His kingdom is made manifest, those places will feel like comfort and relief to us. And when we experience that relief, we'll say, wait a minute, This place is comfortable. What's God doing right now that now I feel like I belong here? And the truth of the matter is, because the kingdom is still present, that we will experience the comfort and relief of the kingdom both now and also then when the kingdom is made complete. So we know that the future hope of being in the kingdom is real, that we are enduring suffering because we know it will come an end when the kingdom comes to completeness, but that there's the real possibility of experiencing the relief of suffering when we're in the kingdom as made present today. And so pay attention to your suffering, because it's the type of suffering you're enduring, you're experiencing, is shaping and transforming you. The question is, into what? Are you sitting in the suffering of self-righteousness or self-infliction? Or are you bearing the transformative suffering of the kingdom and being transformed into a person that will find comfort and relief when experiencing that kingdom today? I pray that you are. I pray that you experience the suffering that transforms us into Jesus. And I pray that this brings you good news and brings you comfort. Thank you for being part of our online family. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so you get notifications for any future videos or content. And feel free to please share with a friend. You can also follow us on Facebook or Instagram, and if you feel so inclined and would like to donate and support our ministry, please click the donate button found in the description. Thank you, and God bless you.